Good evening, this is Brown at Eye of Brown, and tonight we're going to be talking about True Detective Season 1 on DVD. So, True Detective is a show that started in 2014, and this moment, the last season was in 2019, but it was put together as a bit of an anthology series. Each season told a different story with a different cast of characters. So kind of like American Horror Story, I guess you could use that for an example, in the sense that that show in turn had a similar format of different season, different story, different characters. Except whereas that was a horror series, this is a detective series, hence the title True Detective. And so season one was put together in 2014, and it was made up of 8 episodes, and I believe each of the following seasons consisted of the exact same amount of episodes as well. But for this season, the director of all 8 episodes was a guy named Kari Joji Fukunaga. I hope I'm saying his last name right. Apologies if I'm not. But yeah, he was known for directing a recent adaptation of Jane Eyre. When I say recent, I mean it was a couple of years ago, but it was like, I want to say it was like 2011, 2013. But anyway, though, he also directed a movie called Beasts of No Nation, which had Idris Elba in a very atypical role. Not for the faint of heart, but a very compelling movie. So as far as directorial skill goes, this series was in pretty good hands. And it was written, all 8 episodes were written by Nick Pizzolatto, I think it's Pizzolatto. But yeah, he not only wrote all 8 episodes, but he's the guy who basically created the series in the first place. So you had a pretty good creative team going, in the sense that you're getting the series story straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, especially in terms of writing. And so the story begins in 2012, and it's set up to where the framework of the series, it's in 2012, and there's a murder investigation going on, and in Louisiana, and basically the killings are set up to basically resemble something of an occult ritual. And 2 detectives are brought in. Marty Hart, played by Woody Harrelson, and Rust Cohle, who was played by Matthew McConaughey. 2 very different men. But the reason that they were brought in was because back in 1995, the 2 detectives who are on the Louisiana Criminal Investigation Division, by the way, let me rephrase that. They were on that particular division back in the day. But anyway, in 1995, the 2 of them worked together and cracked a very mystifying case with nearly identical occult symbolism. And basically, they thought that they got their man back in 1995, or I should say men back in 1995. But unfortunately, though, fast forward several years later to 2012, a lot of the exact same style of murders are popping up again. And the 2 detectives are basically, confronted with the fact that the job that they did is not complete. And so in this process, though, as the 2 detectives are being interviewed in the series, you get multiple perspectives of events from the past, namely 1995, and maybe a little bit after that. But basically, it cuts between what's the quote-unquote present day of 2012 and then the 90s. And so you see how the characters of you know Marty and Rust, you see how the two of them, work together, and it was sort of a, teeth clenched teamwork type situation because they're so very different in personality, but they're both very good at what they did as far as the job goes. And you get to know them, and you see how they work together, but you also see how in the case of Marty, Woody Harrelson's character, you see how, on the surface, he's a happy family man. He's got a wife played by Michelle Monaghan. Her name's Maggie, by the way. Her character's name's Maggie. Very faithful, beautiful, devoted wife. And he has 2 daughters with her. And on the surface, good family man, good detective. But he has a bit of a drinking problem, to say the least, that doesn't really help with the fact that he also has a bit of an issue in terms of him playing around on his wife with a woman or two that are several years younger than him. And so basically you got that going on. And then with the character of Rust, he never pretended to be anything other than what he was. He had a horrible accident happen to him a long time ago, involving the death of a child. And so basically that irreparably scarred him to a point where now he's forever pessimistic. And he's got a very bleak outlook on life in general, but basically he keeps doing the job because it's what he's good at, and the way he figures it, sometimes it takes a monster to stop a monster. And basically he knows what the world's up to in terms of how dark it can be. And he's in his mind just as messed up as the world, except he's wanting to fight darkness with darkness, so to speak. And so basically the two of them, they get along some of the time, but a lot of the times though, there's conflict over basically their differences of personalities, coupled with the fact that Rust occasionally, calls Marty out on the fact that, hey, he's cheating on his wife, but at the same time, he doesn't straight up, like tell his wife or anything like that, even though she's able to put 2 and 2 together. But so anyway, though, so you see how basically over time, their lives, are basically affected by the case that they were working, and how what was initially a case that seemed to be open and shut once they got their men, turns out to be a lot more complicated with connections to a lot of people in power. And so, this was a very fascinating, first season of the series. And I really enjoyed how, it kind of, the whole back and forth bit as far as, going from the 90s to, the 2000s. You have Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey. They look, basically how their characters would look in the respective time frames. They look, I guess you could say, younger and healthier back in the 90s, whereas in the 2000s, they're definitely older. Like Woody Harrelson's character's put on some weight and he's, lost his hair, whereas Matthew McConaughey, he looks like a walking cadaver. And so, his character, was always rail thin, but he, basically, is, the years have not been kind to him, since, he left the force. But through sheer acting alone, that the two of them convey, how much, their lives have, gradually changed over the years. But also, I gotta give props to, like, the makeup department, especially, with what they did with Matthew McConaughey. I mean, they literally made him look like a cadaver. But also, just you know you could have good actors, doing their thing, but also, the writing by Pizzolatto, his writing, it really gets into some dark places in terms of human nature, and what I guess what these detectives are having to deal with on a regular basis, and I mean, you look into headlines, and what I guess man does to his fellow man, and oftentimes the motive makes little to no sense whatsoever, and other times you see like how something could have been prevented if something else had happened, or something like that. And it's just I think Pizzolatto, it seems like he did a lot of homework in terms of what kind of lives these detectives would have, or at least real life detectives would have, or just police in general. And you're seeing what they have to go up against. I mean, you've got the horror of their crime that they see every day, just in general, but you also at least in the case of this season, you see how much of a problem bureaucracy can be, all the red tape that ensues, because when they start to realize that this series of occultic murders has a far reach to people in power. I mean, that's when it gets pretty spooky, because I mean, you think about all the stuff that's come to light courtesy of social media, or even just throughout history in general. It's about far-reaching conspiracies and things like that, and it's spooky, but it's something that feels like it's a little close to home, or like that could really happen. And even when, say, another thing that was interesting about this season is that there's kind of a supernatural vibe to it, in a sense that part of it's because the character of Rust, he frequently has these hallucinations that look like something out of I guess you could say a horror film, or something like that, and like he'll see these the weird symbols in the sky that are made up of birds, or like he'll be driving along, and the light will almost, the street lights and car lights will kind of take on a life of their own. But basically the reason that he's seeing all this stuff is because he did a lot of drugs in one of his other jobs. It was like a drug task force, I believe, undercover stuff. And so, the drugs he did have kind of left a permanent mark on him. And so, so you're already, when it comes to his character and how he sees things, I mean, the guy's a brilliant detective, but, some of the time you're kind of wondering, okay, how much is this him, actually being onto something, as far as something of an occult nature, and how much of it is him just I guess grappling with a damaged mind, because obviously his mind has been affected by the drugs he took back in the day, due to the necessity of his job. And Marty, his character, doesn't necessarily have that affliction or that sort of connection to something that may be, paranormal in nature. But, it's like the horror for him is just everyday evil, plus, his own, and, demons coming to the forefront and running the show, in a sense of, him, giving into, alcoholism, or, adultery. And and there are a lot of times where as far as the horror goes, I mean, there's an instance where one of his daughters, several years, along, had gotten into a bit of a sexual situation with two older boys, and so basically, they were arrested, and basically they were faced with statutory rape charges, and so Marty, he basically uses his connections to get in there into the jail where they're at, and he basically puts them on the spot, saying, okay, either you guys let me beat the crap out of you, and then we have the understanding that you do not come in within 100 yards of my daughter ever again, or just stay in the jail cell, and I can make sure that those statutory rape charges stick, and you'll have a really good time in prison. And so basically it's one of those moments where if you're if you're either a parent or someone who basically understands the mindset of a parent, you're kind of pulling for him to basically beat the crap out of these guys at this moment, though, because that's his family they were messing with. But then there's a moment right after that where he gets to his car, and then he just pukes out of the sheer guilt of what he's just done, because it's a very human thing to want to protect your daughter, but at the same time, though, he pukes, and he has this guilt because one, he's just abused his authority, but also because these guys are reminding him of himself in a way that he doesn't want to admit. And so I did like how you had that a horror of human nature versus something that may or may not be supernatural, and so I liked how it was like the direct horror versus ambiguous horror, with the two very different characters. And even when the horror angle becomes, I guess you could say, I'm not going to say it fully becomes supernatural, but towards the end of the series, when you see just how layered the cult is that the killer is involved in, you basically are given a glimpse into this dark universe almost. I don't want to say like too much here, but it's just that it's one of those moments where the show, it's been sort of flirting with that direction here and there, but for the most part it's a well-grounded in reality detective story. But at the end, that paranormal connection comes into full swing, and so you got your human everyday evil versus a shade of paranormal evil. And but the way that they did it, though, the meshing of the genres, detective story, crime drama, and then supernatural horror, that had been gradually built up, it meshes very well together. And I really enjoyed this season. I've actually watched all 3 seasons, but for purposes of doing reviews, I wanted to rewatch them. And so season 1, True Detective, was the first thing for me to do, and it was fun to rewatch. Even if I wasn't doing a review on this, season 1 especially, it's something that it's so well done that it's like each episode, I think, is like an hour long, but it's like you're watching a movie. We're talking back in the days when Game of Thrones, back when during its first 5 seasons, when it was still top-notch quality, you felt like you were watching a movie. Well, same quality for True Detective here. And and it's something that if you have any appreciation for good writing, good directing, good acting, it's definitely worth watching. The only downside I can honestly think of is that this is a show that is made for adults. It is not made for children or teenagers, even, I should say. Although teenagers are being exposed to, dark and naughty stuff on, at a much earlier age, unfortunately. But that being said, there's a lot of content here that, it's clearly not meant for kids. Like, there's a lot of, R-rated profanity. There's quite a bit of nudity when it comes to, the fairer sex. And even with, say, Matthew McConaughey and Woody Harrelson, but basically, it's all nitty gritty, and the subject matter too, when it comes to, I guess, the nature of the murders, or just the nature of, the human evil that they go up against. I mean, it's pretty disturbing too. So you really feel like you're watching, a real story just unwind, and you're seeing just how dark, I guess you could say, the human side of things can be, even without, say, something paranormal, butting in. But yeah, definitely not for kids. But at the same time, if you're an adult, with, a discerning eye, and, you like a good detective story, this is definitely, something to pick up. Watch it online, watch a DVD, what have you. I really enjoyed it, and I also liked how, seeing as how, I was born in the 80s, raised in the 90s, as far as like production values go, when it was showing stuff from the 90s, it really looked like something from the 90s, whether it be music or how things were set up, to look, buildings, what have you. And there's also a lot of really good actors that come into play, that have supporting roles that, there are a lot of familiar faces, but, the parts that they play, it's kind of like, whether it's just be someone who pops up, for a few minutes, or, for, more than one episode, everyone here does a really good job. But also liked how whenever they, interview, say, a character that they interacted with in the 90s, and they're re-interviewing them, say, in the 2000s, that, same, like, makeup, department, that did such a good job on Woody Harrelson and Matthew McConaughey did a good job of, making the characters, look like they were older, like the same amount of time had passed, and how it's affected them too. But yeah, so this was a really good season, and it had a really good story, and I liked how ambiguous it was in terms of I mean, is this a diluted bit of human evil, or is there something else at work here? And so, I mean, I guess you could say the answer is a little bit of both, but yeah, really good story, great acting, and just a good solid show. I mean, at least as far as the first season is concerned. I mean, other seasons are great in my opinion too, but the first season, I guess, was probably the best, just in terms of of it being a trendsetter, as far as the detective stories go. But yeah, so I'm gonna give season 1 of True Detective 5 out of 5 stars. It was excellent, and I'm looking forward to rewatching seasons 2 and 3 of True Detective. But for now, thank you very much for taking the time to check out my review. And if y'all picked this up, I hope y'all enjoy it. Y'all got any questions, comments, let me know. Y'all have a good night. Stay safe. Bye.